My name is Girmay Zahalai, and I am the chair of this committee. I would like to thank all of you for being here today. I would like to also thank the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We are on their traditional land and are grateful for them and the land itself. In the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor has issued an emergency order suspending the section of the Open Public Meetings Act that requires we have a physical space for the public to watch our meetings. As such, this special meeting of the Law and Justice Committee is being held in a virtual setting. Today, we will start with a stakeholder discussion on independent investigations by the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. Then I hope to take action on a motion acknowledging receipt of a Proviso report relating to King County search and rescue volunteers and an ordinance creating new penalties for disrupting virtual support and health groups. One final housekeeping note before getting started. To help us manage the meeting, I'd like to ask that the public, as well as all staff, please keep your video off until just before you plan to speak. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Dembowski?
Yeah, I'm here.
Councilmember Dunn? Councilmember Colwells?
Here.
Councilmember Lambert?
Here.
Councilmember Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Chair?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum. Councilmember Dunn is excused.
Thank you so much. May I please have a motion to approve the July 22nd meeting minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. All those in favor of approving the minutes of July 22nd, 2020, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The meeting minutes are approved. Okay. Our first item on the agenda is a stakeholder dialogue regarding independent investigations by the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. OLEO Director Deborah Jacobs is on the line with us and will lead our conversation today. We also have with us Under Sheriff Patty Coles-Tyndall from the Sheriff's Office. And our other active stakeholders here to participate in the discussion today are Jose Marenco, Mike Manzanares, and Sophia Joseph, representing the Puget Sound Police Managers Association, the King County Police Officers Guild, and the local community, respectively. Thank you to all of you for being here today for this important conversation. Madam Clerk, would you please make sure everyone is with us and unmuted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those that are here to speak should have the ability to mute and unmute themselves.
Great, thank you so much. Director Jacobs, please go ahead when you are ready.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's good to see everybody. And I'm excited to have this conversation, which is really long overdue. I requested a stakeholders conversation about independent investigations. And when I say that, I want to be clear that I'm talking about administrative investigations, not criminal investigations. While the criminal investigations fall under I-940 or LETSCA, as we now call it, administrative investigations are for the purpose of determining whether personnel have violated policies or should be subject to discipline. And in 2015, the voters of King County voted for OLEO to be able to conduct investigations. And ever since then, we've been trying to bring that vision to fruition through collective bargaining. And one of the reasons I really wanted to have this conversation is that in the last round of collective bargaining, I really did not have sufficient information or guidance from the council or from the stakeholders, including the community, the unions, and the sheriff's office itself. I didn't have enough feedback and guidance to know what approach to take to try to achieve independent investigations. And I'm hoping that this conversation will be a beginning of trying to sort that out and get that guidance so that we can be successful in bargaining. I do want to thank the representatives from Sonia Joseph from the community, as well as Jose Marenco and Manny Manzanares for being, and Patty Coles-Tyndall from the Sheriff's Office for being willing to come participate in this important dialogue. I also wanted to mention that I have here with me today, somewhere on video, Catherine Olsen, Catherine is an expert in police practices and oversight. She specializes in investigations, and she is an independent consultant who has worked for both the Sheriff's Office and Olio on a pretty regular basis. I asked Catherine to help me explore the possible models and options that the council could consider for this work, and she helped me develop the memo that was presented for you both in the July meeting when we didn't get to this item and in today as well. So there are loosely three models of police oversight. One is called audit, and that work is typically checking to see whether the department conducts thorough and objective investigations on its own. And that's something that at Olio we call certification review. Our staff go through their investigations with a fine-tooth comb and make sure they're thorough and objective. And that is what auditing is thought of in the context of police oversight. The other model is called review, and that's systemic reviews. That's review of anything, training, and a singular incident like we're going to talk about on September 2nd with Tommy Lay. It could be about how they investigate use of force, literally anything from a systemic perspective is called review. The third model is investigation, and that's really what we're talking about today, where an independent investigatory body of civilians conducts independent investigations. Olio was created as a hybrid of all three models. We probably have more duties than most oversight offices around the country, though some of them, like independent investigations, have not yet come to fruition. Why are independent investigations important? Well, I expect if there's public comment today, and I know certainly from Sonia Joseph, we'll hear a little bit about that, but because there is a lack of credibility with the investigations that police conduct themselves, whether it's actually that they're not credible and biased, or there's a perception that they're not credible because of it's police investigating themselves. So there are issues concerning public trust and transparency that are very essential, and that are, I assume, what were behind the council's conversations about doing independent investigations. So I want to share with you three possible approaches we could take to some form of independent investigation in King County over the Sheriff's Office. I want to give you these disclaimers. All of these require collective bargaining, and they all require a financial investment beyond what's been done before. While I haven't conducted a full analysis, it really depends on some of the scope of what we would look at. So the first model would be that Olio conducts independent investigation itself. If that were the case, we would need adequate staffing and resources to do that, which we currently don't have. And the important questions for council would be, what is the scope? Are we just doing an investigation? Are we doing the findings where we determine if someone has violated policy? Are we recommending or trying to assert discipline? Are we doing these investigations instead of the Sheriff's Office or in addition to the Sheriff's Office? And what is the timing around that? What types of complaints or matters is Olio investigating? Is it day-to-day misconduct complaints, or is it officer-involved shootings? What is the level of seriousness and the nature that you would like Olio to look at? Also, some oversight offices think about it. Did the complaint come from the public, or did the complaint come from a member of personnel? And the duties could be divided on that basis as well. So there's a lot of scope issues, but it would be very possible for Olio to create this program. It would, I think, in some ways have to be a bright line program for Olio, because most of the rest of the work we do is of a review nature. Investigating is doing. The other work is reviewing the work of others. And, you know, it came up when we presented the systemic review of Mike Chance Dunlop Gittens investigation. It came up that the Guild claimed that we had done an investigation. Nope, we just looked at what had already been done. Investigation is where you do original activity. So if Olio were to do it, those are some of the considerations you would have to take. Another model, which is less independent but has some other benefits, is where you had civilian-led internal investigations in the Sheriff's Office, and Olio still reviews the quality of those investigations. So this is essentially a model similar to Seattle, where you have a civilian at the head of the Internal Investigations Unit and perhaps a mix of civilian and commissioned investigators. Keep in mind with KCSO, this is just a group of 6 people, so it's not a ton of resources there. And then they would conduct the investigations and Olio would still review it for quality. It kind of creates a double layer of civilian involvement. It's probably one of the less expensive ideas on my list. And then finally, the most expensive idea on my list would be for the county to consider a standalone civilian entity for the purpose of independent investigations. And my thought there is it would be the most independent you could have. But beyond that, it could also potentially serve all the other police departments in King County that don't have oversight and that have plenty of shootings and other traumatic incidents to look at. And, you know, right now at the state level, and we're really fortunate that we're talking about this now because over the last 2 years through the implementation of I-940, the community has developed tremendous expertise on independent investigations. So there are a lot of resources to draw from in community. But the state is now looking at like a statewide entity to do the criminal. So what I'm proposing here is kind of a county version for the administrative where they could serve a variety of different departments on a voluntary and contractual basis that would take some of these political and hard investigations completely out of the hands of law enforcement. So I'm eager. I tried to keep this short because I know there's important things on the agenda and we have other speakers that I'm very eager to hear from. I really appreciate the stakeholders willing to come and give some thoughts. I think next steps would be to get feedback from the council about the models that you prefer or are interested in. And ultimately, this would probably need to go into labor policy for you. So my memo has a little more detail. I hope I was not too brief or too long, and I welcome questions. And also, again, Catherine Olsen, our expert, is on here with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Jacobs. That was very helpful. May the next speaker please go ahead.
I will speak. Patty Cole-Tyndall, Sheriff for the King County Sheriff's Office. So I just want to say one thing Deborah did not mention, and she and I did have a conversation late last week, but just so the council is aware, in the last bargain, the KC King County Police Officers Guild bargaining, we were able to come to agreement on an MOU. And so I want you to be aware of this. This MOU talks about future work that we would do collectively, not just the sheriff's office, not just the unions, but Olio, council, so executive. It would be a collective effort to basically research, perhaps make site visits as a group to other law enforcement agencies that have models we might want to consider. This was actually done early on, prior to or about the time Olio was being created. So this would be an updated version of that. And so that work is supposed to happen in 2021 prior to going back to the table to bargain. So I understand Deborah's memo. She wanted to get direction, bargaining direction, and that makes total sense about getting bargaining direction. But I want everybody to understand that there's this other effort going on, that we have an MOU, council approved it, and so it can complement, or I guess I should say, Deborah's memo might complement this other effort that we have going on. So what I would say from the sheriff's office is we are more than open to explore anything, a variety of options. I mean, we are actually now partnering with the exec's office on looking at what kind of changes might we be able to make to Skyway and White Center in terms of being responsive to the community. So we are very interested in working together, figuring out what is the best solution for King County. And one other thing I want to say is yesterday we did post our IIU complaint dashboards open to the public, which we are one of the first agencies in the nation to have done that. So now we have our use of force dashboards and also our IIU complaint dashboards. This is a total effort to be transparent and show the community we want to partner, we want to show what we have. So that's what I would have to say. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Patty. Much appreciated. May the next speaker go ahead.
I'm guessing people don't know what order they're going in. Maybe call on them.
Okay. Yes. If there's anybody, if we have Jose Marenco or Mike Manzanares or Sophia Joseph or Bob Lurie, please feel free to jump in.
Manzanares here for KCPOG. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you so much for being on today. Please go ahead.
Also in the room is Jose Marenco at the end of the table. We're here together. As far as KCPOG is concerned, we are willing to take part in any fact-finding mission regarding the models that Ms. Jacobs has brought forth in a collective effort to find what's best for King County and King County Sheriff's Office in regards to investigations. I'd like to note that for the public, Polio has a representative of every IIU investigation and has since this contract and the previous contracts have been in place. They are there in every investigation and are able to ask questions of the officers or the deputies involved. And I also would like to point out that even NACL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement, has not been able to pinpoint which is the best model. It's basically up to the areas that are going to research and look for it. But we are at KCPOG are willing to find the best solution for the Sheriff's Office and for the citizens of King County.
And Jose Marenco here from PSPMA. I represent the captains and majors with the King County Sheriff's Office. And, my input for this would be that we are open to and appreciate the fact that we've been brought in to this discussion early on, because ultimately we are looking for transparent, quality, professional policing for the citizens of King County, to support and to give everybody an opportunity to thrive in the community. And that is the basis for law enforcement. It's to give people that opportunity and that safety to be able to live their best lives. So we are open to having these discussions to make ourselves better as a profession, as an agency. And we believe that having that dialogue early on is going to be important so that we can get a workable solution. We all want, again, professional law enforcement. We want to deal with the problematic deputies and officers that are in our system, but we need to do that collaboratively to come up with a plan on how to best address those issues that come up. So that's my input.
Thank you so much, Captain. Thank you to all the representatives from KCPOG. Do you have anyone else on your end who would like to make any comments today?
No.
I think we're good, unless you have any questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other speakers today?
Yes, council member, we have Sonia Joseph. And I just want to mention before you turn to her in response to what Patty as well as the union folks said, I do hope you will all stay on if there's public comment during this, because one thing that is missing from the agreement to explore these issues during bargaining is the public's input and the public's perspective on what's best and most important. They will not be at that meeting. I will do, if I'm there, my best to represent those interests. But I think that would be really important for the folks in the unions, hopefully, and Patty as well, to stay on and hear that perspective. And that's one reason today's stakeholder conversation was important. And I think Sonia's on the line.
Great. And Sonia, I'm so sorry. My notes had a typo in them. Sorry for calling you Sophia.
That's okay. So good to see you. Well, good morning. I'm Sonia Joseph, an impacted family of police violence and use of deadly force. I'm the mother of Giovanni Joseph McDade, and my 20-year-old biracial son was stolen from me on June 24th, 2017, in the city of Kent at the hands of Officer William Davis. Thank you for inviting me to the table. Today I'm representing the community to speak on independent administrative investigations at the King County Sheriff Office. During my course over 3 years, I've worked closely with impacted families and vested stakeholders on crafting independent investigations for Initiative 940. During this intense work, I listened to community, stakeholders, and impacted families from across Washington state. I can say that communities across the state want independent investigations. Due to the historic mistrust and misconduct of all branches of law enforcement, community wants outside authority to investigate any types of complaints internally and externally, and particularly on the issue of allegations against use of deadly force. The community has a strong focus on independent investigations, and we want an outside entity to monitor and review the sheriff's office and possibly all law enforcement departments. An example of what I've attended several cases and have spoken in support of families killed by King County Sheriff's Office. The two cases that I have followed closely are 17-year-old Mike Chance Gittens Dunlap and 20-year-old Tommy Lay, who was killed on June 14, 2017, 10 days before my son's murder. I can say that in Gittin Dunlap's case, there are extreme misuse of authority, misuse of funds, and murder of an innocent 17-year-old child. Olio's independent investigations into the sheriff's office in the case of Gittin Dunlap resulted in 23 recommendations. Why is it important to have oversight and independent administrative investigations? And I'll list off the items that are important to community. Oversight holds the sheriff's department accountable for officers' actions. Oversight agencies can improve the quality of the department's internal investigations and alleged misconduct. The community at large can be reassured that discipline is being opposed when appropriate, and the increasing of transparency of the disciplinary process. Oversight can improve community relations by fostering communication between community and police agencies. Oversight can help reduce public concern, reassurance for law enforcement agencies to have oversight authority. It also helps to increase public understanding of law enforcement policies and procedures. And independent considerations, the decision the community would like to have, would want the authority to be within the standalone model. And ideally, the standalone model would improve policies and procedures across Washington. Community feels strongly about model number 3 as well. Ideally, if model number 2, standalone, and model number 3, civilian inside the sheriff's office, could coincide, that would be the ideal vision of oversight that would be satisfactory to the community. And I understand that there is a concern of budget, but the budget can be rearranged and funding can be allocated for community oversight, and it's feasible. In conclusion, the importance of community voices being heard is vital for policy change and building bridges within community agencies. We're at the brinks of a revolution as the nation has erupted with protests. Communities across the world are angry with law enforcement, misuse of power, acting above the law, breaking policies, and getting away with murder. A lot of policing agencies are starting to adapt oversight. It is necessary to create an oversight entity and holding law enforcement accountable. The future depends on rebuilding trust and reform with stakeholders to ensure that everyone has dialogue at the table to rebuild. The future starts here today with the committee's leadership on independent administrative investigations of the King County's office. I hope community is being heard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Sonia. We really appreciate you being here and for your powerful words today and for your advocacy. Do we have any other speakers today?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you so much to all of you, Director Jacobs, representatives from KCPOG, Sonia, we really appreciate your time and your work on this. Do my colleagues have any questions for any of our participants before we close this briefing and move on? We heard some really important things regarding independent investigations on the administrative side. We heard some great options from Director Jacobs. Do my colleagues want to discuss these options?
Have questions, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Council Member Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So oversight is a big deal, for sure. And as many of you know, my dad was the night supervising officer of the San Francisco Police Department. So I've been talking to my dad, who's 96, and at 96 still has much wisdom. He said, baby, how did this even get to this place? And he said, you know, when I walk the streets, even people I arrested would come up to me and talk to me and ask me to go to coffee with them. And we had relationship. And I said, Daddy, I think that's what's missing, the relationship. That people need to be on the streets. They need to know the people in the community and to go to community meetings. In my district, the officers do know the community. And the structure is that the city councils work with the sheriff on which officers will be their officers. As you know, the contract cities are actually King County sheriffs. And the officers really do come to a lot of activities. You see them at all kinds of things. And people, for the most part, have their cell phone numbers. They know them by name. And so some of what we're talking about, I believe the base is that there isn't good relationship. One of the programs that I think, well, first of all, that's the first thing I would say is relationship and having activities where people can get to know the officers as people, because they are people and they have their own families and their own compassions. Second thing is that we have a program that I think I would like to ask people to look at and see if this program could be expanded under your request to go countywide. And that program is called the Radar Program, where an officer has a counselor with them. It has been piloted in the north part of the county and has done excellent work. And I think that it gives the best of both worlds. We're not sending officers or counselors into places without having the information they need for specifics of what to expect. And that the counselor, once things are stabilized, can then do the follow-up and the help and get resources into the families that are needed. It is working. I have had nothing but compliments for that program. And so I think that if we were to expand that program, that within a very short amount of time, the lady who set up the program, who's now retired, Carol Cummings, did tell me that she was interested in helping us. So we could do some great work to do what we are being asked to do in a very quick manner. If you were to investigate this and then ask us if you like the program to expand it. So that would be something that I think could be a good suggestion to start with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Lambert.
Up the Grove.
Councilmember Up the Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some brief comments and then a question, if I might. I first wanted to thank you for holding the roundtable on this topic. I think if we're going to deliver justice for Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, we need to have strong, independent oversight of law enforcement. It's something that we know the public supports. We've seen that in our votes on the charter amendment previously, and we hear it in the streets right now, a clear voice. I think there are lots of people who are comfortable with the current model, but it's become very clear to me that there are lots of people who don't feel safe in their community. And one of the tools we have is that clear, independent civilian investigative authority. I also don't think it's that radical of a notion. A lot of other agencies within government, a lot of private sector use the model of bringing in outside independent experts to review situations when there's a conflict or an issue. So it's not a particularly radical or foreign idea. It hit home for me was actually Ms. Joseph's loss. I recall meeting with you, Sonia. At the time, we had some issues with trying to ensure the independence of the investigation into the death of your son. And when a family has gone through trauma, having that confidence in the understanding around the facts is something that's, I think, really, really important. And so I appreciate you being here today and speaking truth to power. It's not easy. I know that. I'm really interested in this idea of, I don't remember which number we called it, but the idea of standing up an agency that also could serve other police agencies in the county. And my interest in that is because most of my constituents are served by police agencies other than the King County Sheriff's Office. We do receive and value some regional services, transit police, things like that. But most of the folks I represent are being served by other agencies. And so that appeals to me. And the question I had, I guess, for Ms. Jacobs is, do you have any sense of whether or not these local governments would take us up on that offer? if we had the ability to provide that service. Just a sense or a feel, or how could that work?
Well, I definitely have a strong feeling or actually knowledge of community members in some of those locations who would very much like to push for this. That I've met with folks in Kent, I've met with folks in Tukwila, I think Bellevue. Olio gets outreach all the time from municipalities and people wanting to kind of learn more about oversight. And since the latest uprising, NACOL, the National Professional Group for Oversight, has gotten over 150 inquiries from around the country from locations that want to set up oversight. So it's a growing field and a growing profession. I think they would have to weigh their pros and cons, the cons being, the political dynamics of their situation, demanding more independent, or there's not pros and cons, but they need to think through the cost benefits for themselves. Like, is there a demand in their community? Are they struggling to produce objective quality internal investigations? Can it possibly be done more cheaply or more expediently with an outside agency? It's something that I would love to, start talking to city council members about and see about their level of interest. I think the confidence of the public that a shooting in one of these places might be looked at administratively by another agency outside those who, are in relationship with the people involved in the shooting would be very healthy. So I think it's something very worth exploring. And I've thought too about Olio itself. So that could be Olio could also invite contracts for different pieces of review. I think the benefit of separating out independent investigations to a larger agency rather than having it be Olio is Olio could still do all its review functions and including reviewing that agency's thing. So it's a little bit of a double review. But it could also be a division of Olio doing it, and it could also be offered to the county. So council member, if you want to explore that with some of the cities you work with, I think that'd be really important information to inform the council's direction on this.
Thanks. A super quick follow-up, if I might, Mr. Chair. Do you think there's some economies to scale to be had from that approach? I think of smaller cities and just capacity issues. That if this was an agency that developed the trust of local governments, much the same way we do contract services for our law enforcement services to some cities, in part because of the economy of scale. It saves money for taxpayers. Is that part of the thinking as well?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you were directing that to me. I think
I'm not sure. I think it's because you brought the idea forward. I think probably it might make sense.
I think there's a ton of efficiencies and benefits to having it that are hard to miss. But if they don't already have oversight, it's that they're consolidating. It would probably depend on a lot of things, but could potentially be the same or more money or less. It kind of depends. Also, again, that gets into scope. Are you having them do only investigations of really serious incidents? Are you doing also courtesy? Are you doing other kinds of misconduct, financial corruption, et cetera? So there's, it would really have to be thought through, but I feel like you'd be on the cutting edge if there was interest in that kind of thing, because just like the state is looking at a statewide office to help with the criminal side, a county-based one to look at the administrative, I think could be very effective and really build confidence and understanding in the community of these investigations. Community members, rightfully so, have enough experience that they're never going to have faith in the investigations that police do on their own. And in the case of the sheriff's office, they've seen firsthand some of the shortcomings. So it's a strong passion to have faith in these investigations. And that is worth a lot of bank, however you measure it.
Thanks.
Colleagues, any further discussion?
Dembowski.
Councilmember Domowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all panelists for being here today. A couple months ago, the County Council adopted an unusual and specific labor policy directing the county executive, who is our bargaining agent for civilian oversight, to engage with the guilds to see if they would return to the table and bargain and accept subpoena power for the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight and independent investigative authority. The guild declined, and I appreciate the guild members being here today. I listened carefully to your words, and I appreciated the sentiment of your willingness to work toward this. I wonder why you declined to engage at the bargaining table when the County Council unanimously asked that those two items be negotiated into the current contract. Was I on mute?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Are we on?
Oh, there we go. Now we're getting you.
There we go. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
This is Derek Isaacson. I'm the attorney for the King County Police Officers Guild. We have declined to come back to the table because we negotiated in good faith over that contract for over 3 years and reached an agreement that the subpoena power would be something that would be addressed if it were actually enacted by the people. So that's the reason we declined to come back to the table to address that.
If it were, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. If it were actually what? Impacted by people?
Adopted by the people through a charter amendment.
Oh. Well, it's in the ordinance that empowers the Office of Law Enforcement now.
Well,
So
we have a disagreement about what power that the council has. The council doesn't have the authority to subpoena people themselves. So how
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
In very, very limited circumstances. And that's what power the people have given to you. So that's only in very limited circumstances that you can subpoena people. So we want you to go to the people to find out if they want Oleo to have that power. That's what we've asked.
What about independent investigations? So I got the answer. The guild is telling the county council what charter amendments to send to the voters on the subpoena power. But what about the independent investigations?
Well, we're not telling you what to send to the voters. We're just saying that that's where the key is for us to negotiate that issue.
Got it.
And you asked another question.
Yeah, the other thing in the labor policy that we adopted that asked you to was to accept the independent investigative power in the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. And I'll just say I'm wondering why you said no on that as well.
Well, we think that we negotiated the ability for Oleo to have that power. They essentially can come and they are a part of every investigation. They have no restrictions on what questions they can ask. They can actually ask for witnesses to be called. They can be there and present for every interview. If there is something that the sheriff's office refuses to investigate, they have the authority to investigate that themselves. So we think that this actually does allow for that independent investigation. I know Oleo doesn't necessarily agree with that, or perhaps doesn't agree with that, but that's the way we see it.
Got it. I guess I appreciate understanding your perspective. That sounds to me like the ability to monitor someone else's investigation rather than conduct their own. And I think what the community has asked for and what the ordinance that was adopted by the council says is that they should have independent investigatory authority, not just a review, monitor and review function. That's what we'll be able to get. So the follow-up answer concerns me now with respect to how open the guild is actually willing to engage on that, if that's the thinking as to why. In other words, it sounds like your view is it's good enough.
It's what we negotiated the last time. We do have, one more year of that contract. We've agreed to an MOU to research these other options. We are really looking forward to doing that. That's what we did initially. King County
to some degree, led the process of oversight that started back in 2005. And both the sheriff's office, I believe council was invited, the executive was invited. We went out and saw these other models in operation. And we all sat in the same room and asked the questions of each person involved in those, the community, the guilds, the departments, the city. We all sat and asked them questions, found out what worked best for them, and then came back with an idea of how we were going to proceed. That has since, I guess, changed over time. There's been other models that have been developed. That's what we want to do this time as well. That's why we entered into that MOU. We want to go and have a serious review of these. We invite the council to participate in that model so we can all sit down with these people and find out exactly how these things work and how well they work and what they provide to the community in terms of transparency, efficiency, and satisfaction.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Domowski. Colleagues? I have a quick question, Director Jacobs, if you're still there.
Of course.
Thank you. I think we've touched on this issue, but I just want to get a little bit of clarity. Can any of the three options you laid out be truly independent and truly effective without state law change, namely removing oversight from the bargaining table? If that does not happen at the state level, would any of these three options actually be independent?
I think that the bargaining is a huge obstacle, as the conversation Councilmember Domowski and the Guild folks just had demonstrates very different images of what should be. I'm really worried about oversight as a profession in this state because we're in such a straitjacket, and it's just a profoundly difficult role to be in. And so it's not very tempting for councils or for people to establish something that's going to be hindered and thwarted along the way. So I think that state law change is essential. I would say that among the three options, the only one that might improve things without state law change is integrating civilians and providing civilian leadership to the internal investigation system. Still requires bargaining, of course, including with PSPMA, the managers union that Jose Marenco is here representing. One thing I think is interesting about the leadership of the internal investigations team is that almost nobody wants that job. They come in and out as quick as possible, don't put pictures on the wall. They call it, they refer it to sometimes as the rat shop or something like that. And it's really not appealing to them. And I think that probably says a lot. The folks I've worked with have largely done really good work under that difficult context, but I'm not sure what sense it would make for the union to fight for that position of captain of IIU when nobody really wants to do it. So that's something that could be explored. I haven't talked to Jose about this or anyone else. I do have a good relationship with PSPMA, and I'm so grateful for the open dialogue. I think that union has a lot in common with the interests of the council and Olio because they have a managerial perspective. So it might be a conversation worth having with your 30 plus managers and captains and majors who would be typically the people who run IIU. So that's the one I think would be perhaps the least lift in bargaining, but honestly, you'd have to ask the folks in that room because they're the ones who I was hoping we would actually learn more today about sort of what their greatest concerns are so that we can look at models that take that into account. And so hopefully there would be a more robust conversation in a public setting, including as well as at the bargaining table, because this is of tremendous paramount concern to the public. I can't think of a issue that the public is more focused on than this one right now.
Thank you, Director Jacobs. And just for full clarity, when you said the one that is integrated with the civilians could be the most effective under the current regime. Were you talking about the option 2 or the option 3 that you mentioned?
So it's where option 2, I believe, civilian-led and staffed internal investigations unit. And what I think I'm saying is that I think that could be the most efficiently bargained and efficiently put in place. I'm guessing among the options I presented that it's one of the more palatable versus a completely independent offices of civilians doing investigations. But again, I was hoping we'd hear more about that from the union members, and hopefully we will as we are in dialogue at the table. But I think that would be the quickest, the cheapest, and perhaps the least challenging in bargaining.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. So I obviously believe in oversight because we can all get better, and having feedback is a good way to get better in whatever we do. But I think that the whole thing needs to be balanced, and I'm not hearing a lot of balance. We've been told certain things, and then when I did my own investigation, I looked to see, that the person on their own Facebook page had gang tattoos and was exhibiting what appeared to me to be a gang symbol. And so, we hear one thing in testimony, but we're not hearing some of the other issues. Was this person being involved in a crime at the time that this happened? And looking at the holistic, okay, they were involved in a crime. Why were they doing a crime? Okay, they're involved in a gang. Why were they involved in a gang? They were in possession of a gun. Why were they in possession of a gun? And beginning to look then to community resources to say, okay, had this person not had the gun with them and brandished it, if not for that, they might still be with us. So what do we do to make sure that the community, whether it's the family, the extended cousins, the church, whatever, I'd like to ask you to look at what was done in Washington, D.C. It's a very successful program, or has been a very successful program. I haven't looked at it for years, but they had a retired police officer that the community loved. They agreed that this was a well-respected person. And he had a house, actually, which was his office now. And when a person in the community was arrested or about to be arrested, they would say, and the youth would say, I'm part of this program. I'm a friend. What he would say is, I'm a friend of officer such and such. And that was a signal that don't arrest me, take me to this place. And then they would go in and sit down at the table and talk. The officer on the street, officer such and such, and the youth, and work out a plan and work with the community. Officer that had the house knew the people in the community, and he would call, one of the ministers, one of the community leaders, a mentor, whomever, that would then come to the house and work with the youth ongoing. And that turned out to be a very successful program. Oh my gosh, Slade Gordon just died. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Wow. Anyway, I think that if we could establish something, because the community is saying they want community, we should set up a place, find somebody that community will staff, and be able to pull these resources in and do that. It worked in DC, and I think it is something that could work here, but we need to be honest. When we talk about how badly something came down, I was very much touched by one person's testimony, especially as the person read me a poem, and as a poet, it really hit my heart. And then I did some of my own investigation and thought, oh, okay. So I've been very aware that we aren't looking at both sides. Yes, we want the police to improve, but we also want behaviors to improve so that the clash doesn't happen. And so I think that as we go forward, we need to look at balance. So that would be one of my suggestions. We look at balance, and I will try to find out who the person is in DC for the contact. Who should I give that contact to when I find it? Okay.
Councilmember Lambert, is that a question for Director Jacobs?
Yeah, that would be great.
You're always welcome to send us resources. I think, when you talk about fair and balanced, the community's view is really like there's been a tremendous imbalance already. And so while I know community is very supportive of social service programs that are geared towards helping people establish economic and other types of stability, I think that the main focus that they've asked us to bring is how to make sure that independent investigations are truly independent and free from any biases. I welcome your materials, and as you know, I'm always responsive to anything you send.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I do believe that going forward has to be that everybody comes to the table with open and honest hearts to improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lambert, and we send our thoughts and prayers to Senator Gordon and his loved ones during this incredibly difficult time.
Thank you. I'm sorry that it just showed up on my screen and was kind of a shock. So thank you. He is a dear friend to all of us, regardless of party, because of his wisdom and not to mention what he did for sports in our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further discussion? Okay. Thank you again to our stakeholders for taking the time to be here today. Much appreciated. We will move on in the agenda to item 5. The first of our action items today is proposed motion 2020-0035, which is a motion to acknowledge receipt of the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget's plan to provide King County search and rescue volunteers with bulk rate gasoline and vehicle license plates. We have Nick Bowman from our central staff to give us a brief staff report. Nick, the line is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, council members. Nick Bowman, council central staff for the record. The materials for agenda item 5 begin on page 17 of your packet materials. Proposed motion 2020-0035 and the attached report responds to the requirements of the 2019-2020 biennial budget as amended by the 2019 first omnibus. Section 9, Proviso P7 of the adopted omnibus budget obliged the executive to transmit a report detailing a plan to provide bulk rate gasoline and vehicle license plates to King County Search and Rescue volunteers. In accordance with the Proviso requirements, the report reviews options to offer bulk rate gasoline and vehicle license plates to King County Search and Rescue volunteers. The plan determines that while it would be feasible to provide discount gasoline to the volunteers through an appropriation, state law prohibits the provision of free or discounted license plates to all but a select number of organizations, such as governments and Native American tribes. Just for a bit of background, the adopted 2019-2020 biennial budget included a proviso which withheld $100,000 of the sheriff's appropriation until such a time that the sheriff transmitted a plan to provide bulk rate gasoline and vehicle license plates to the King County Search and Rescue volunteers. In the 2019 first omnibus, the proviso was amended by the council to have the executive and not the sheriff develop the plan and to extend the due date from May 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. The amendment did not alter or modify the subject or required content of the plan in any way. And for a bit of background on the King County Search and Rescue organization, it is an all-volunteer organization whose primary purpose is to assist the sheriff's office in responding to a variety of incidents involving lost or injured persons. Search and rescue volunteers also assist during natural disasters like flooding, windstorms, and earthquakes, and in locating downed missing aircrafts. Search and rescue relies entirely on donations to fund its operations and does not receive any funding from the county. As I mentioned, the proviso requirements call for a plan with two primary elements: assessing how the county might provide bulk rate gasoline and discounted or free vehicle license plates to search and rescue volunteers. Starting with bulk rate gasoline, the King County Fleet Services Division of the Department of Executive Services offers agency vehicle users the option to purchase bulk rate fuel at specified locations. The cost of this fuel is approximately 1/3 less per gallon than fuel purchased at retail gas stations. According to the report, the executive found that tracking an independent organization's use of the county's bulk rate discount gas card would be overly cumbersome and difficult to audit. This is primarily due to the county's financial accounting system, which is not structured efficiently to allow transactions to be posted by non-county organizations. The report does, however, suggest that the county could provide a fuel benefit to search and rescue through a general fund appropriation. By using fuel usage rates obtained from search and rescue, the executive could include in the executive's proposed 2021-2020 biennial budget a general fund appropriation roughly equivalent to the bulk rate available to county vehicle users. The appropriation would likely have to be made to the sheriff's office and used to reimburse the volunteers. The report further suggests that if council were interested in this approach, the council should adopt a motion calling on the executive to develop the proposal for the 21-2020 budget. And I'd just like to remind the council that this was submitted quite a while back. And so as we all are aware, the executive budget is in the process of being transmitted. So we may have missed the date on that one. Moving on to the provision of vehicle license plates, the county's Records and Licensing Service Division is responsible for managing vehicle licensing on behalf of the state. According to the report, vehicles and licensing staff noted that state law allows exempt license plates to be issued only to vehicles owned by certain types of organizations, such as Native American tribes and governments. Given this limitation in state law, the report states that county provisions of exempt license plates to search and rescue vehicles is not possible. In response to a council staff inquiry as to whether a general fund appropriation could be made to search and rescue, similar to the report's proposal for the provision of bulk rate gasoline, executive staff stated an appropriation for license plates would be far more difficult to determine than that of bulk rate gasoline. According to the executive, the cost of license plates varies wildly depending on the types of vehicle and the fees imposed. And there is no process in place for the county to gather this type of information, aside from asking search and rescue members to voluntarily supply it. And attempting to establish such a process would take a considerable amount of time to collect and verify. Therefore, the executives did not recommend going forward with this proposal. That concludes my staff report. I believe we have Director Dwight Dively of the Office of Performance Strategy and Budget on the line with us to help answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Colleagues.
Chair.
Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. This actually is a question maybe for Dwight and maybe for Patty Coltindo, I'm not sure which. Could you tell me how many officers in the Sheriff's Department are assigned to search and rescue?
You know, I don't have it's not many that only do SAR, the search and rescue.
Yes.
I think there's 2.
Yes, I think your answer is correct.
Yes.
And I will tell you that every weekend this year that the volunteers have been out rescuing people. And that if I remember correctly from the last meeting, so the disclaimer is I'm on the advisory board, that our data to date is larger than the data in the compilation of all of last year. So these people are, Jen's here. Jen can tell us the correct answer. Welcome, Jen. So I think that having 2 officers to do this would be impossible. We have made some pretty incredible rescues recently where had we not found them, the results might not have been good results. And that we could not do what it is we do or need to do by one of our duties if it weren't for the fact, and Jen can tell how many people are out doing this. So I'm highly respectful of the work that they do, and I am thankful. And I have a letter that I will always say from a grandmother who her grandson was saved by this group of people. And there are many that are thankful. So I just wanted you to know that in our own current resources, we have 2 people, and that if it weren't for the volunteers, so much that we can do, and maybe with a direct appropriation to help with this, I think is more than a great token of our appreciation.
Colleagues.
You might want to ask Jen, who is the president of SARS, if she would like to speak. I don't know. She's on the line. I just saw her.
Jen, would you like to speak?
Sure. Thanks, Council, for taking the time to discuss this ordinance. Yeah, Kathy, you're right. It's 2 sheriff's deputies that manage search and rescue calls. We've had 89, the sheriff's office has had 89 search and rescue calls in 33 days. So that should give you an idea of capacity and how terribly busy we are. The volunteer workforce here in King County is about 600 volunteers. I would say that this, I guess, is my takeaway message. Where there's a will, there's a way. We have a lot of options of how to work out the mechanics of some of these fuel and registration issues. We can be very flexible. We just need to figure out a path that works for everybody. In terms of the exempt vehicles, I want to be super clear that we're not asking for all of the volunteers to have exempt vehicles. We're asking for a small fleet of about 13 vehicles, which are designated search and rescue vehicles, and they only go out on missions related to WAC 118. So I think there's a lot of room here. And I'll just say this in closing. We've done some calculations, and we've shown that the volunteer workforce saves the county roughly $8 million annually in the volunteer corps that we provide. I think there's a way that we can offset some of those costs, which are a large burden for a volunteer organization to carry. And I'd like an opportunity to work through some of those mechanics. I've been president of the association for 3 years now, and I've never been invited to be a part of that problem-solving process. So I would really like a chance to engage with someone with the county to try to work through some of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Colleagues? Okay.
Would you like a motion to release the funds, and also then to do what Jen just said, to work with PSB. I know that I've talked to PSB about it, and they do have some great ideas on how to deal with this. I think the idea that came up a minute ago about a direct appropriation, I think is a great idea. So if you'd like a motion, I'll be happy to make it.
Yes, a motion to move proposed motion 2020-0035 would be great.
Great, I have it up. I'd like to move proposed motion 2020-0035 with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you. Clerk, may you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Dombowski?
Aye.
Councilmember Dunn? Councilmember Colwells?
Aye.
Aye, Dunn, votes aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Lambert?
Aye.
Councilmember Updegrove?
Aye.
Mr. Chair?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the vote is 6 ayes, 0 noes.
Thank you so much. Our last item on the agenda today is proposed ordinance 2020-0201, which would create the offense of obtaining information or disrupting video teleconferences of recovery, mental health, and behavioral health support groups. We will just get a debrief on this item today, and we will not take action on it. Clifton Curry from our central staff is with us today to give us a report. Cliff, may you please proceed with the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say that the items for this morning's agenda item are begin on page 29 of your packet with the staff report. This proposed ordinance 2020-0201 would create the offense of obtaining information or disrupting video conferences of recovery, mental health, or behavioral health support groups without authorization. And it would add a new chapter to the King County Code and provide civil liability and criminal penalties for violations of this. The proposed ordinance would make it unlawful for any person to intercept, record, or knowingly circumvent technological access measures or barriers to access or hack a video teleconference system, such as the system that we're on right now, in order to obtain information from the individuals participating in the meeting or to interfere with the meeting in any such way. And it's geared primarily looking at anyone who would disrupt a recovery, mental health, or behavioral health support group, such as those conducted under the auspices of Alcoholics or Narcotics Anonymous, without first obtaining the consent of all the individuals engaged in the meeting. For violations of this ordinance, there would be criminal and civil penalties, very similar to what happens in state law for phone calls. In my staff report, I have a rather long description of video teleconferencing, et cetera, with definitions. I think in the last 6 months, we've become more attuned to what video teleconferencing is than we ever thought we would. It's been a very, very useful bridge for individuals, whether it's through telemedicine, telenursing, providing support to committees during council meetings, and so on. But it's been adopted significantly by behavioral health providers and support organizations whose only option to interact with staff safely during the COVID pandemic is through the use of these types of video teleconferencing. As I note in the staff report, both Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, who have tens of thousands of members nation and worldwide, have actually switched to the use of video teleconferencing for its meetings in order to ensure that its members are safe. As we have seen the increase in the use of this video teleconferencing, many of you have seen news coverage. There's been extensive coverage in technical journals that have determined that poorly configured or inadequately supervised video teleconferencing can be hacked with virtual entry by criminals, either seeking to disrupt those teleconferencing or actually to steal information from the teleconferencing. State law has certain prohibitions against intercepting, recording, or divulging private communications, but those are primarily related to telephones, basically eavesdropping on a telephone call and how you would use that kind of information. They have similar criminal and civil penalties for hacking into data systems, but neither the prohibitions related to telephones or to hacking computer systems directly relate to the kind of teleconferencing we're talking about here. This proposed ordinance would make it unlawful for any person to intercept or record or knowingly disrupt a meeting. It provides definitions for video teleconferencing to the point of recognizing that it can even be used between just two individuals using a regular telephone. It also establishes what would be necessary to determine consent. Consent would be by all individuals who participate in the meeting, where there's a mechanism to reasonably acknowledge that the meeting is about to be recorded or transmitted. The proposed ordinance would provide for two mechanisms to enforce the requirements. First, there with a criminal penalty, where the violation of this chapter would be a gross misdemeanor, punishable with a maximum jail sentence of 364 days and monetary fines up to $5,000. In addition, the proposed ordinance, like state law, would include a provision that would allow a person who is injured by the disruption of a teleconference meeting or theft of information by any unauthorized hacking to file a civil cause of action, which is a civil lawsuit for damages. Under the legislation, an individual that provides proves an injury would be entitled to actual damages, including mental pain, suffering endured by the individual on account of the violation, and reasonable attorney fees and other costs of litigation. This proposed ordinance has been reviewed by legal counsel in the prosecutor's office, and if this measure is approved at committee in its current form, it would be subject to an advertising period before it can be heard in full council. Contained in your packet today are a proposed ordinance, proposed amendment number 1 which is on page 39, with an accompanying title amendment. This amendment was requested by Councilmember Dembowski. This amendment would eliminate the criminal penalties for a violation of the proposed ordinance while retaining the right of a civil cause of action for violations. And that, Mr. Chair, concludes my staff report. I'm available for any questions.
Thanks so much, Cliff. Councilmember Dunn, I know we're not taking action on this today. Would you still like to speak to it today, or would you like to hold off until our next meeting?
Hey there. Yeah, I need to shave this beard. I realize that. But Mr. Chair, I don't want to take action on it today because it's such a significant, I think, bill. It's fairly simple, but there's consequences of it that I really want to both work on and work the legislation with each individual council member appropriately to go back and forth on it. So, and I appreciate Councilmember Dembowski's got an amendment as well. I'd like a chance to hold it in committee where I think it's the proper place to hopefully perfect legislation and talk with each individual member. So I'm hoping actually we don't take action on it today in any form, but we'd certainly love to hear amendments or thoughts, suggestions, concerns, praises for it. The background on this is it came out of the addiction and recovery community. And the concern is that, look, when people go to AA meetings, that I wouldn't expect that not everybody's been to one of those. I've been to more than my fair share, but they are an opportunity to really express how you're feeling, what challenges you're facing, what things in the world might be triggering risks of relapse. It's a chance to air your challenges with the world and get advice and counsel from other people. Some of the stuff that comes out in these AA meetings is incredibly personal, incredibly private, incredibly damaging potentially if it gets out into the broader community, which is exactly why, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous uses the term anonymous, because it's understood by millions of people around the world that when they leave those rooms, they don't really talk about it much or identify individuals or what they said. I'll be walking through the community all around Seattle and Bellevue, and I'll run into people that I see in those meetings, and it's just a simple head nod. It's quite an interesting experience. If you haven't gone, I encourage you to go, or you can come with me. But that said, people are genuinely worried that people are going to check in on those phone lines, the Zoom calls, just like we have right now, and record information that people are self-disclosing. Anywhere from an ex-spouse who wants to damage you to somebody going through a divorce to a coworker who wants to get dirt on you. There are 1,000 different ways that reasonable expectation of privacy that we value so much as Americans can be infiltrated. And I'm trying to make a statement to those who might want to do that kind of cyber stalking, for lack of a better term, that, not only is it arguably illegal under state law, but hey, by the way, the county has taken a strong position on it as well. So that's the background of it. And if anyone has thoughts or comments or suggestions for improvement, I'm all ears and open to those.
Councilmember Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question of Cliff. Although this legislation has to do with support groups for recovery purposes, behavioral health, and so forth, would anything be applicable to other areas of interest as well, or is it just solely focused on this area? And I'm thinking even of our council meetings, or our committee meetings, we try to take precautions so that we're not, I think it's called Zoom bombed with nefarious actions. So would anything other than what's contained in this be open season?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cole-Wells, this particular ordinance is directly written to the group's behavioral health or recovery support groups. It does not cover other types of uses of teleconferencing, whether it's a council meeting or even a regular medical use of telemedicine.
What about with regard to the courts? I mean, I think we do have video teleconferencing on certain occasions. I know that's not covered in this legislation, but is that something that's the content of this legislation we already have for the courts protection or for individuals?
My understanding is through court rule, those and yes, through court rule, those types of conferences are protected, or use of teleconferencing is protected. Again, since the court has a long history of both using teleconferencing and also using telephonic hearings and so on. So those are protected under court rule. Again, though, there are no specific, as Councilmember Dunn noted, there's nothing specific in state law that has been updated to recognize the proliferation of the use of this type of teleconferencing that we're on right now.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Lambert.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Colwell's question was very appropriate. I know that Senator Ruben Carlisle is interested in this at the state level. I've spoken to him about a version of this and something he's working on. So if we do want to do something at the state level, we have somebody that might be willing to assist us. So Cliff, could you find out how much of this is already included in HIPAA? And, you know, we don't always know. I mean, obviously, if you decided to dive bomb in, we'd recognize you. But if you were living in Mongolia, I might not recognize you. So if the person doing this is not recognizable or lives in our country, what jurisdiction do we really have in doing that?
It's again, Councilmember, the HIPAA protections go to the person who controls the information, and they're required to protect that information and to ensure that it's not used in ways that it's not supposed to be used. And as a consequence, for example, if Kaiser Permanente was using telemedicine, or when our jail health does and so on, they have to ensure there's sufficient protections for that. In a case where there was a violations, your example, someone from Mongolia was able to break into one of those conferences and so on, presumably the individual who was harmed in that instance would go after the person who's in control of the information. So if they would go to Kaiser and say this information was stolen, it wouldn't necessarily go to the perpetrator of the person who hacked in. The difference with this particular legislation, it recognizes that an individual can be harmed if the information is taken, especially in the situation, as Councilmember Dunn shared, with an individual who is involved in AA or NA, or in other behavioral health settings where they're sharing, in a group setting, those types of things. And it would allow that individual both to seek in the times of a violation, rather than the meeting organizer going after the meeting organizer, would instead look to prosecuting the individual who hacked in, individual or individuals who hacked in, or more importantly, there's a recognition when the prosecutor reviewed this, while there were no legal problems related to it, they recognized this would be difficult to prosecute from a criminal basis, but on a civil basis, the barriers are a lot lower. So if it could be, if an individual has the ability to demonstrate that the person hacking in has done them damage, there's the opportunity for civil action that goes beyond just a recovery of attorney fees, but allows for the recovery for harm for damages.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Colleagues?
Dembowski.
Councilmember Dembowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Cliff, thanks for the staff report. As we consider this ordinance, I would like you to, if you would, get with legal counsel and get an analysis of the additional federal laws, including specifically Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which was an amendment to the Federal Wiretap Act, and also the CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And Councilmember Dunn is probably an expert on those as a former federal prosecutor, but I'm just kind of wondering whether they, particularly the Wiretap Act amendment, whether that covers this. I also want to understand, would it be, if we adopted it, just limited to unincorporated King County under our police power? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I will follow up on that. I believe that in the prosecutor's review, they did look at federal law, but I will follow up with that. And then also on the application to, I believe it's a county-wide application, but I will follow up on that.
Thank you. Colleagues? All right, thank you so much. As Councilmember Dunn noted, we will not be taking action today, but thankful for this conversation. Councilmember Dunn, any final words before we move on?
Yeah. Thanks for the comments of those members. I appreciate it very much. When we get the answers to those questions that were presented today, and work with Cliff Curry on that, and then I'm going to reach out to each one of you and talk to you a little bit more about this this particular piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing it to be heard today. I'm grateful.
Of course. All right. Thank you very much to everyone on the line today, especially the presenters. Now I would like to move on to public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on the line wishing to provide public comment?
Yes, you do, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So having an entirely remote meeting is unusual for the King County Council, and I want to be sure that everyone who has called in understands the rules for public comment and how the process will be managed. First, some ground rules. Public comment must be related to items on today's agenda and not be used for the purpose of assisting a campaign for election of any person to any office or for the promotion or opposition to any ballot proposition. Public comment must also not include obscene speech. I want to repeat the point above. Public comment must be about a specific item on the agenda. This is not general public comment that you sometimes find at full council. So if you are speaking about an item that is not on this agenda or that is outside the scope of this committee, I will ask the clerk to mute you. Indeed, if you have noted in your as you signed up for public comment that you're calling in about a topic that's not on the agenda or outside of the scope of this public of this committee, you will not even be called on. So if a speaker fails to abide by these restrictions, I will rule the speaker out of order and require the speaker to exit the virtual meeting. Now, I will describe the process. As all members of the public joined the meeting, they were automatically muted. I can see your name or last 3 digits of your phone number. Our committee clerk will call the names and numbers. When your name or last 3 digits of your phone number is called, staff will unmute your line. Please make sure to also unmute your own phone if you have muted yourself as a courtesy. Before you begin your testimony, please wait to be acknowledged to be sure we can hear you, and then start by saying and spelling your name so we can capture it accurately for the record. If you wish for your video to be turned on for public comment, please request this before beginning your public comment. You will have 2 minutes to speak, and we'll hear a timer go off when you have reached 2 minutes. You can finish your thought, but please wrap up your comments to allow the next person to speak. If you go much past 2 minutes, you will also be muted. If you're listening on TV or streaming, please turn that function off. Otherwise, we will hear feedback on the line. If you are disruptive to the meeting, I will ask staff to hang up the call so you may please leave. Okay, please hang up after you have provided your comment to make it easier for us to manage the call. You can follow the remainder of the meeting on King County TV channel 22 or stream online. The link to stream online is on the King County's Council's website, kingcounty.gov/council, and click on the Watch Us Live button. We will now begin public comment period. A reminder to please wait to be acknowledged before you begin speaking. Madam Clerk, please go ahead and begin calling names and numbers for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first person is Polly Giannotti. I have unmuted you. You can unmute yourself and go ahead. Mr. Giannotti is not unmuting himself. I will move on to Frank Gittens. I've unmuted you. If you'd like to speak, please go ahead. He's not unmuting himself. I'll move on to Tricia Hughes. I've unmuted you. If you'd like to speak to an item on today's agenda, please go ahead. Okay, I will move on to Gina Macero.
Wait.
This is Gina Macero. Please go ahead. You are unmuted. And you're on our screen, Gina Macero. Okay, I'll move on to Joyce Brecky. You are unmuted on our end. If you'd like to speak, go ahead. So the next person is Kathy Strauss.
What? No.
If you speak, Ms. Strauss, please go ahead.
Sorry, I don't have a comment. Thank you.
The next person is Nakia Hunter. If you'd like to speak, please unmute yourself and go ahead. Mr. Chair, I've called on everyone who signed up to speak to an item on today's agenda, and no one seems to want to speak, so that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I think we should probably circle back to people. I haven't had a situation where no one was able to speak, so maybe there's some kind of delay or technical issue. Maybe start from the top and let's try a couple more people and see if we can resolve this.
Okay.
I've actually gotten a message from someone stating that they're unable to mute. So if she could unmute them, they could talk.
Ms. Joseph, who are you speaking about?
Polly.
Okay, I will try Polly again. I've unmuted Polly on my end. Now Polly has to try to unmute on his end or her end. Sometimes when they call in on a cell phone, depending on how they set up the audio, they might not be able to unmute themselves. But I have unmuted this person on our end. I'm not getting that person. I'll try Frank Gittens again. Nope. Tricia Hughes, you're unmuted on our end. Joyce Brecky, you're unmuted. Nakia Hunter. Mr. Chair, it appears that no one is unmuting themselves on their end or are unable to unmute themselves.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any kind of tech person on the line that can help out with this? I imagine we have a tech situation.
It's my understanding, Mr. Chair, it would not be on our end. It would be on the caller's end on how they joined the meeting.
Based on what Polly has said, it's when he tries to unmute, it states that you have been muted by the meeting host and cannot unmute yourself.
I am definitely unmuting him.
So from my experience, the person who didn't want to give a comment, I was suddenly unmuted by you. So maybe the folks who are trying to get on should mute themselves and wait for her to unmute you, because that's what happened with me. As frightening as that was.
Thank you for that information. So, Polly, if you'd like to mute yourself, I will now try to unmute you. Okay, I've unmuted you, but you still have to unmute yourself. Isn't working. Mr. Chair, would you like me to try unmuting everybody? And just how
Yes,
that goes?
briefly, as long as you are able to remute everyone.
Yes, I can remute everyone at your command, and then you will have to unmute yourself and then speak after that. But
okay,
I'm going to unmute everybody. Now it says all participants are unmuted. So, Mr. Chair, if you'd like to see if someone wants to speak.
Paul or anyone else who dialed in for public comment, are you able to speak? Okay, I'm not hearing anything.
Would you like me to mute everybody? Oh, go.
Sorry, Sharon. Mr. Chair, I would note that if people are wanting to provide comment and for whatever technical reasons they are not able to unmute, they can go to the Law Justice website and submit written comment, which will be forwarded to all members.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May you provide the website for people so that people will have that immediately available to them?
Yes, if you'll give me just a moment, I will get that information.
Thank you. Really sorry, everyone. I have not experienced a mass inability to unmute like this before. So we will just have to read your public comment over email, and the clerk will now provide you the website for doing so. I invite you to send in written comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The website is kingcounty.gov/council/committees/law_justice.aspx. Alternatively, you can go to kingcounty.gov and click on the council and the Law Justice Committee, and there's a link on that page for you to provide written public comment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And just to repeat, for those who were unable to unmute today, I invite you to submit written public comment. You can do so by going to kingcounty.gov/council/committee/law_justice.axps. Did I get that right, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And I just received a message from our IT staff saying that if you are on a phone, it's 6 to unmute the phone. So I don't know if you wanted to have people try that.
So Frank Gittens and Polly both were experiencing the same problem. When they pressed 6 to unmute, it wasn't functioning.
I think we have
Ms. Joseph,
Mr. Gittens on the line now. If you would like to give public comment, Mr. Gittens, please go ahead.
How you doing this morning? Yeah, it probably worked. I'm not really sure what is okay to talk about or not okay to talk about, but the reason why I'm here is because, again, I want to thank everybody for being here and supporting me, but I'm also here to support Deborah Jacobs and the King County Law Enforcement Oversight. I think this is a very important cause for our city, for our state. I think it should be something that should be in every state. I think I sat here back in 2016, and I was reading in the newspaper that this was coming to, our state, and that we were going to have some oversight. And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder if this is just something that we're just doing to just, calm the people and just have a perception of having this office, or if it's something that's really going to do us some justice and some cause for our community and of our state. And I started reading further into it, and I found that the job was going to Deborah Jacobs, who's a person that's born and bred in our state. And I thought to myself after reading her resume, I was like, wow, I think we're finally on something here. And I was proud of our state, and I was proud of our city for doing this. And as you know, it was a big part of me and my family in helping us get some transparency in our case. And it will be here to help other people, I hope, in the future. And I'm just very proud of this organization and the people that allowed this organization to be a part of our community. And I think our community is very proud to have it. And it's important to me that we continue to do this, and that we can adopt it in other places and other cities. And I think Ms. Jacobs is a very, very, very important part of that. And I support her 100,000%. I hope she has the support of the other people that I'm not here to change anybody's mind, but I'm here to put something on your mind. And I think it's very important to have this organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gittens. You are the one person I would never cut off during public comment, but I will note moving forward that we have to stay on the agenda to things especially that are within the scope of this committee for anyone else providing public comment.
Excuse me, this is Kathy Strauss again. I do have Polly G on my phone now, if that would be okay for him to just speak through his phone, into my computer. What do you think about that?
It's absolutely fine. I will note, again, I've given a second warning. This is for things that are specifically on this agenda, and we can have Madam Clerk read through what the agenda items are if that would be helpful. But if you speak on things that are outside the scope of this agenda and outside the scope of this committee, I will ask the clerk to mute you. Please go ahead.
Go ahead, Polly.
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Paulie Giulianotti, and I am an activist for police accountability. I'm calling in to support independent investigations of police use of force, and very respectfully, Councilmember Girmay Zahalai, the reappointment of Director Jacobs is really important to the cause of...
Madam Clerk, please go ahead and mute this individual.
We don't have... Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on to provide public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't see anybody else.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone who joined this call today. We appreciate you. With no other business before the special meeting of the Law and Justice Committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.